Okay, this is a question for you who are not Cuban and probably do not speak Spanish, and probably you have never been in Cuba, and yet you support the Cuban Revolution. I just want to share with you a data that I want you to consider if you really care for the truth. And this is the data. In Cuba, the regime, the Cuban Revolution, boasts about how popular it is among Cubans. They boast about the so-called popular support of the Cuban people for the revolution. As a proof of that, they like to make all these marches in Havana. They like to do all this on the Revolution Square, Plaza de la Revolución. They like to fill it with people. And that will give you the impression that, the revolution is very popular in Cuba. But there is something that you don't know because you do not live in a dictatorship, most likely than not. Most likely than not, you do not live in a totalitarian dictatorship, which is the worst kind of dictatorship. Those people that you see there, especially those young guys and girls, they are either students or military personnel dressed on civilian clothing, or government workers. Remember, Cuba is a socialist country, so the state payroll is huge. So if you are Cuban and you live in Cuba, most likely than not, you will work for the state, and most likely than not, you will study, you will go to an state university or college of school. So those people that you see there, most of those people are told to be there. They're even provided transportation to be there. So if they don't go, they have leadership at different levels to which they can pretty much, you get yourself in trouble. No, you're not going to, I don't think that you're going to go to jail for not going in there, but probably you might lose your job if you really care about your job. But the point that I'm trying to make to you is that the revolution is not popular in Cuba. Those people that you see there marching, they are told to be there. Now think with me. Cuba has about and between 2.5 to 3 millions of nationals living overseas. What happened overseas is that you do not see that support in favor of the Cuban Revolution outside of Cuba by Cubans nationals. So when those Cubans that you see marching at the Plaza de la Revolución or revolutionary of the Revolution Square or whatever that is, and on those streets, when those same people, they go outside of Cuba, you do not see them with the same passion defending the revolutions and all that stuff. You don't see that happening. Actually, I want you to consider something that have been bothering the revolution for decades. And this is precisely the lack of support of the Cubans who live overseas, outside of Cuba, for the Cuban Revolution. Most of the protests and marchings and manifestations that you see on the streets, on different cities in the world, they are not necessarily made of Cuban nationals. That's a little secret that you might want to know if you really care about this. Most of those people, they're either European or Americans or whatever, but they are not, the majority, they are not Cubans. Now, you will find a few pockets, and I need to warn you about this if you care about this issue. You may find a few pockets of Cuban nationals overseas supporting the revolution, but most of those people are there because they have some sort of connection with the Cuban government. And you always do have like a residue of Cubans that, because of whatever, I don't know, nostalgia, I don't know why, but they may support the Cuban Revolution. But you're talking about a very few amount of people that is so insignificant then nobody really take them seriously. I want you to understand this. If the Cuban people really support the Cuban Revolution, boy, you will see marches in every city where you have Cubans outside. And you also need to take this into consideration. Cubans, we are very political, active, and motivated. We are very political, passionate people. Unlike others, Hispanics, actually, that they don't show the same motivation for politics. But Cubans, we are a political beast. We like to do politics. We engage in politics. We participate in politics. And we are a very vocal minority in the United States and also within the Hispanic community itself. We're still being a very low minority. So in the United States, we are probably like about 2 millions, 1.5, 1.6, 2 million, something like that. Yet we have Cuban representation and we have Cuban descent representations at the different levels of government. So yes, we are very political passionate. And yet you do not find that spontaneously. You do not find that organically. You do not find that energy and that presence of Cuban nationals supporting the Cuban Revolution outside of Cuba. And if you are somebody who cares about our history, our suffering, please take this into consideration. No, the regimes knows that the revolution is not popular within the people, in the people. They know that. The proof of this is for 67 years, they have never have an election in equal conditions, without repercussions, and on equal terms. They do not allow Cubans to do political activism other than in the favor of the revolution. So if you are a Cuban national and with this passion that characterizes us and distinguishes us, if you want to do political activism against the revolution, that is not allowed in Cuba. So a lot of us, we have to wait until we leave the country, because unfortunately, the government criminalizes our desire to speak against the revolution. So, if you are not Cuban and you think that you have the support of the Cuban people because you are supporting the Cuban Revolution, you are going against the grain. You are going against the Cuban people. The Cuban people do not support the revolution. I don't say that. The numbers outside of Cuba says that, all right? That's the data. It's out there. So, no, the Cuban people do not support the revolution. And the question is why? Well, this is the question. This is the answer right here. Because we know empirically, what you refuse probably to accept. And what is that? That the Cuban Revolution is a dictatorship. Every Cuban knows that the Cuban Revolution is not a democracy. Democracy is not in their DNA. We know it is a dictatorship, and of the worst kind. A kind of dictatorship that would not even let people leave the country. That is the absolute worst kind of dictatorship. The dictatorship that uses the country as a prison against their own people. So, we know the Cuban Revolution is a dictatorship. That's why we do not support it. You refuse to accept what the numbers and our history and our voices are telling you. It is a dictatorship. You don't feel it that way because you have a nostalgia for the left. But if I would be a left individual, somebody who is prone to the left, I certainly won't like to be associated with the Cuban Revolution because they are ruthless. They are intolerant, very undemocratic, And honestly, in the 21st century, that doesn't fix. That doesn't fit in with the 21st century. That really doesn't fit in with humanity. It doesn't matter what century we are, honestly. But that's the reason. They are not popular within the Cuban people. In Cuba, you have to do as you're told so. Outside of Cuba, it's a different story. It's a different kind of behavior that the government gets from us.